walk through. As you'll see, there's a lot of global variables and kind of just things to help us with drawing, string choices, stuff like that. This is for rock, paper, scissors, oobleck, fire. As you will see here, these are arranged in a particular order such that paper beats these two, scissors beats these two, and so on and so forth, even wrapping around. But we're going to go ahead and just show some of the server stuff. This was all provided for us in the PIO Nimble starter pack, if you will. And again, this is the server code. So this is just all the server callbacks that were provided to us, such as on read, on write, updating characteristics, and whatnot. But we'll go ahead and come back to these methods. But what we're going to show right now is just the setup. So what you'll see is that we're doing begin, kind of just initializing some of the M5 stuff, starting a Nimble server. And then this is the name of our server device, Cardboard RPSOF, which is basically the host, if you will. So this is all just P server startup stuff. So we're going to do P server equals Nimble device create server, and then server set callbacks to the methods that I set before. And then our service will be called fade. And then on that service, we have the A and the B, which is basically going to be client to server and then server to client. And then we'll basically just set some of those starting values, set the characteristic callbacks, and then just start the service. And then we'll get some advertising just so that we can kind of see the things around us and other things can see us as well. And then we will add the bad service to the advertising so that other people can see us. So we'll go ahead and start that and then do last time equals millis and serial print advertising started. And that'll happen every time we get disconnected from a client. The setup will be run. So what I'll show here is in the loop, we basically have if the server has not selected an option yet, we're going to get a press point, and then we kind of just have some different buttons set up. And these are basically our left and right buttons, as well as our submit button. So you can kind of just choose an option and then submit that. So what will happen next is basically if the game state, and what I'll do is I'll go ahead and show you game state. Our game state that's being passed to the client basically is just victory, loss, or the concatenation of player 1 health, player 2 health, and the number of action. So if that game state is loss or victory, then we're going to go ahead and say display win-loss equals true, and then update the screen, which in this case will basically just fill it with white and then tell the user whether or not they won or they lost. Next, we're going to go down and say if the server is still connected, then we're going to get the client to server characteristic, and basically just read in that response and then store that response into client response so we can access that globally. So then another thing that we'll do down here is we're going to say client move number, which is basically the number of actions that the client has done. And this is just for the purpose of syncing up some of our responses and things. We'll basically get the second to last piece of information within that response, which as you'll see is player 1 health, player 2 health, move number, and player 2 choice. This will be basically, this is all just information that helps us sync up some of the game server logic stuff. So then we'll move down here and we'll basically say if they have selected and it's the first time through, we're basically just going to increment the action. This basically just wraps around so that we don't have to deal with double digits and sending strings over. But we're basically just going to increment the action and then first time through equals false. So client move number is equal, if client move number is equal to the number of action and we have selected one, which basically means if we're both at the same stage, we were both on our fourth move, and I've selected an action, we're going to go ahead and say the outcome of that is determined by evaluate action. Now, evaluate action is basically just going to return 0 on a tie, or 1 for server victory and 2 for client victory for that specific bout, if you will. So what that'll do is basically say if the outcome was server victory, then player 2 health decrement. If it was a client victory, player 1 health decrement. Then the current game state equals evaluate game state, kind of just refresh that game state and then concatenate the outcome of that round onto that as well. So then we're going to draw round outcome, which you'll see here. Draw round outcome basically just draws a white, green, or red screen telling them it was a tie, they dealt damage, or they got dealt damage. So then going back down here again, you'll see here we were. So now we have not selected a new item yet, right, for the next round, if you will. First time through is true. And then basically it'll set a delay for just a half a second or so that the client has time to kind of catch up in a sense. So now we're basically going to say if the P server is still connected, we're going to get service by UUID fade. And on B, which is the server to client characteristic, we're going to say send them the game state along with the outcome that we've determined. So it'll send that over to them. This is just for debugging, but it'll set that value and then it'll delay for a quarter second before updating that characteristic just to give them time to catch up in a sense. So now if the milliseconds is less than last time, is greater than 1,000, then basically update screen. So basically it's updating the screen only every 1 second just to kind of save on some very not needed processing power. So that is the vast majority of the server code. Now I'm going to go ahead and just detail some of the details of the client code as well, just to kind of show how some of it's very different. As you can see, a lot of the starting variables are very much the same, such as the string choices, some of the drawing numbers and things. So what we're going to go ahead and do is basically show that there's different client callbacks on the Nimble library, which again was given to us on the PIO Nimble kind of quick start guide in a sense. So these are the client callbacks that are happening on connect, on disconnect, all of those things. So as you'll see here, advertised device callbacks was also given to us. Notify CB was also given to us. So same with scan ended, client callbacks, and connect to server and whatnot. So what's happening here is it's basically going to go through and it's going to get a list of all of the clients that it can find, basically all of the Nimble devices that it can find, and it'll try to connect to each one of those things. And yeah, this is all code that was given to us on the Nimble library, which was pretty fun. But it's basically saying, hey, if we've connected to it and we don't have a client yet that we've set up, then go ahead and create that client to be a new client. And then I'll set the client callbacks, set a timeout timer, and then client should have connected, I think. This is basically just debugging for us to make sure that it actually was connecting. And so it's going down a little bit further. This is, again, all just given to us. But if we're going to go down here and say, here we go. So this is some of the code that we wrote ourselves. So PSVC is P client get service of fade, which is, again, that's the service that was set up by the server. If that service exists pretty much, then we're going to say the server to client characteristic is defined as B, and then client to server is characterized by A. Now it'll basically just say if these two things exist, if it can read, then it'll start reading in, and it'll print out some of those values. And then this is, again, just some random descriptor stuff that was given to us that we kind of just ignored. Yeah, so basically everything up until that point on line 302 is basically given to us, except for a few things like setting up the specific characteristics and whatnot. So now eval game state is going to be a little bit different than it was before. Again, if the server said, hey, I won, we don't want the client to go, yay, we won. So if the server says that we won, then we know that we actually lost. And then if the server says, oh, dang it, I lost, then we go, oh, hey, that's good for us. That means that we won. Otherwise, it'll basically just say the current game state is the current health of both players concatenated with the number of action that we are on. And it'll return that game state. Evaluate action was super fun. We thought it had to be way more complicated than it had to be. What we essentially ended up doing is just having the server send that over. And we got server string character at the very end of it. So that action number basically is just given to us by the server. And then again, update screen is pretty much exactly the same. Draw round outcome. The only difference here is basically it says the server sent a bad response, which means it's good for us. So we kind of just switched, instead of 0 and 1, we have 0 and 2 here. And And then the setup is, again, very much the same. The only difference is instead of starting a server and starting a service, we basically are initializing our device and scanning for these other devices, and then basically just starting that. And then on the loop, we'll basically just say, if I need to connect, then connect to the server. And then basically if that thing that you just connected to is not the cardboard RPSOF device that we're looking for, basically just do it again. And so what's happening down here is essentially all just the same type of logic. We're basically just evaluating some game states. We're going to be reading in some information from the server. We're going to be writing some information to the server and then updating everything else based off of that, which again is very, very, very similar to how we did it in the other one. But that's kind of the key differences between client and server. Hope you enjoyed yet another one of our project code walkthroughs. And I hope you have a wonderful evening or day or morning, whatever time of day it might be for you.